On March 12, 2026, 14 days into the war, Iran's state television interrupted its regular broadcast. A news anchor appeared on screen. Behind her, a single still photograph. A man in a black turban, stone-faced, staring into the camera. No movement, no sound, just a photograph. And then the anchor began to read. She read a statement attributed to Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, a man who had not been seen in public in over 2 weeks. A man whose injuries from the opening strikes were unconfirmed, whose survival was the subject of international speculation. The President of the United States had publicly said, on the record, that he had heard Mojtaba Khamenei was not alive, and yet his words were being read on state television to a nation at war, to a people under bombardment, to a country where the internet had been shut down, to a population that had been rising up demanding the end of the system. The statement covered the war, the Strait of Hormuz, and revenge. But buried inside was a declaration about enemies, not just America and Israel. The new supreme leader considers this country's enemies to exist in 2 directions: external enemies from above, and internal enemies in the streets. Iran's new supreme leader just declared war on both at the same time. Before we go into the statement, we need to understand who this man is. Mojtaba Khamenei spent decades as a powerful and invisible figure. He operated entirely in the shadows. He gave no public speeches. He was deliberately and carefully kept out of the public eye. He was his father's enforcer, his fixer, the man behind the curtain. His inner circle is composed of hardline IRGC commanders, men who have led the crackdowns, men who have ordered the arrests, the beatings, the live fire on protesters. This is not a reformer. Mojtaba Khamenei is 56 years old and more hardline than his father, who ruled for 37 years. His first statement was defiant, designed to signal continuity. The message was, "We are the same system, and we will fight with the same ferocity." As of March 16th, Mojtaba has still not appeared on camera. Unverified reports claim he was transferred to Moscow for medical treatment. What we know for certain is this: the most powerful man in Iran has not been seen in public since his father was killed. To understand the internal enemies declaration, you need to understand what Iran looked like before February 28th. The economy had collapsed. Food price inflation reached 70%. Ordinary Iranians were struggling to buy bread. By January 2026, protests had spread to all 31 provinces. More than 200 cities were involved. Iranians were chanting death to the dictator. Students at major universities joined. Chanting said Ali will be toppled this year. The regime did what it always does when it feels existential threat. It shot them. The crackdown resulted in thousands of protesters killed, the largest massacre in modern Iranian history. Then, on February 28th, the bombs began to fall, and everything changed again. Some Iranians felt the instinct to defend their soil. Others saw the war as their moment, when the walls might finally crack. The IRGC intelligence organization declared that enemies of the Republic were encouraging street protests. They called for a constant presence on the ground. The chief of police warned that any protester would be seen as an enemy, and that security forces had their fingers on the trigger. Protesters as military targets. This is the context of Mojtaba Khamenei's first statement. After he was named supreme leader, chants of death to Mojtaba were heard from apartment windows across Tehran at night. That is the Iran the new leader is trying to hold together. A nation bombed from outside, a nation burning with rage from within. A new leader that nobody has seen, and a declaration that the enemies are everywhere. Now we go into the statement itself. Because the first public words of a supreme leader matter enormously in Iran. They set doctrine, they define enemies. They tell the IRGC what it has permission to do. They tell the people what the regime considers acceptable. They tell the world what Iran's red lines are. And Mojtaba Khamenei's first statement, delivered through a television anchor reading from a page over a still photograph, contained more threats than most leaders deliver. Let's go through it, piece by piece. Before we get into the content, we have to talk about the form. The way this statement was delivered tells you as much as what was said. The Iranian government could not or would not put that leader on camera. No video, no audio, no live appearance. A news anchor read his words aloud. A still photograph of his face was displayed on the screen. This had never happened before at this level. Every previous supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, spoke directly to their people during national crisis. The regime's official explanation was that he was lightly injured in the strikes that killed his father, but authorities provided no direct evidence. Reports continue to circulate that Mojtaba Khamenei may have been transferred to Moscow for medical treatment. Some believe his injuries may prevent a public appearance. Strategically, this is significant. The message appeared closely aligned with the Revolutionary Guard's messaging, leading observers to ask, who is actually running Iran? The IRGC security forces are exerting greater control. Even before the war, the IRGC was Iran's most powerful institution. The war has accelerated their dominance. The statement opened with an unconditional, open-ended vow of revenge, not just for one death, for everything. Mojtaba Khamenei told the people, "I assure everyone that we will not neglect avenging the blood of your martyrs." And then he went much further. The revenge sought is for every member of the nation killed. Each one becomes an independent case for revenge until action is taken. This is a theology of perpetual war, a framework in which Iran can never be at peace because the ledger of revenge never closes. It included a direct financial threat. We will seek compensation for the war through any possible means, or we will destroy their assets. The second major element concerned the Strait of Hormuz. This became a statement addressed to the entire global economy. Khamenei called it a lever. The waterway through which 1/5 of global oil passes is being used to cause maximum pain to adversaries. Oil prices have soared. Iran warned prices could reach $200 per barrel. This has forced the largest strategic reserve release in history. The statement explicitly called on regional countries to close U.S. military bases immediately or face continued attacks. The third major element turned to the axis of resistance, the armed groups in Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq. Mojtaba Khamenei called them in. Studies have been conducted regarding the opening of other fronts in which the enemy has little experience and is highly vulnerable. This is a threat from a country that has spent 47 years building asymmetric capabilities for a moment of maximum pressure. The final element was a call for national unity. He praised the insight of the nation, but there was a warning underneath the praise. Translation: we need you in the streets to demonstrate that the people stand with this leadership. The war consumes everything. The Iranian society remains divided due to the same economic hardships that fueled protests. The regime has simply added war on top. That is the full picture of what Mojtaba Khamenei said on March 12, 2026. We have laid out who Mojtaba Khamenei is, a hardline IRGC-connected leader who has not been seen in public since before the war began. We have gone through every major element of his first statement: the revenge doctrine, the Strait of Hormuz as leverage, and the activation of proxies. His call for unity barely conceals the regime's terror of its own population. Now we ask the question every analyst is privately asking: can the Islamic Republic of Iran survive a simultaneous two-front war? A war against the most powerful military coalition in modern history, the United States and Israel, supported by NATO allies and Gulf partners, and a war against its own citizens, the people in the streets, the people chanting from the windows, the people who have already been killed by the thousands and have not forgotten. History teaches us that regimes trying to fight both external pressure and mass domestic opposition almost never survive. Something gives what gives here and when. The IRGC is now, for all practical purposes, running the country. U.S. intelligence assessments state the regime will remain for now, but critically weakened. The powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps security forces are exerting greater control. More hardline, more IRGC control. This is the trajectory the war accelerated. U.S. and Israeli strikes destroyed elements of Iran's conventional military, but the IRGC, the political police and economic empire, has been empowered. Mojtaba Khamenei's inner circle is composed of IRGC hardliners like Ahmad Vahidi, who treated reformists as internal enemies of the regime. The situation is the entrenchment of the security state. The window for an opposition leader to rise is rapidly closing, if not already too late. While the outside world focuses on the military dimension, there is a domestic reality that is almost impossible to comprehend. The nationwide internet shutdown has been in place since February 28. 85 million people have been living without free access to information, without the ability to communicate with the outside world, without the ability to document and share what is happening to them. The regime is targeting individuals with Starlink access. NetBlocks reported a complete collapse in connectivity, silencing even state media accounts on X. This is total information warfare against the Iranian people, not against America, not against Israel, against their own citizens. The besieged militia has set up armed checkpoints across Tehran. Armored vehicles and masked security forces have been deployed to street rallies. The UN warned that the combination of military pressure and security crackdown raised the risk of grave human rights violations to an unprecedented level. The regime is using the wartime state of emergency as a cover for political purges. The IRGC is arresting political opponents and silencing reformists. Through it all, the Iranian people have found one last form of defiance. At night, people have been going to their windows and chanting, "Death to Mojtaba," not in the streets, that is too dangerous, but from the windows. Quietly enough to stay safe, loudly enough to be heard. Whispered defiance from apartment windows at midnight, while bombs fall and militias patrol the streets below. The Islamic Republic is trying to fight two different enemies with strategies that contradict each other and will eventually become unsustainable. Against the US and Israel, the strategy is resilience. The Strait of Hormuz closure and proxy activations show the world they are not bending. Against its own people, the strategy is terror. But projecting strength requires resources, soldiers, weapons, money, attention. Economically, the country is in a condition that should be impossible to sustain. The Iranian rial has halved in value. Inflation is rampant. The Strait of Hormuz closure has stopped Iran's own oil exports. The regime is bleeding the global economy and cutting off its own income. The first scenario is prolonged attrition. Conflict continues through air, missile and cyber strikes. Nobody wins decisively. Costs rise for everyone. The second scenario is political rupture. If the Nowruz gatherings evolve into protests, the regime's security forces might not hold both fronts. The third scenario is a sudden political decision. President Pezeshkian talked about conditions for peace, contradicting Mojtaba Khamenei's appetite for revenge. The Iranian people are suffering on an scale difficult to comprehend. Over 3 million displaced, an internet blackout, a missing leader. But from apartment windows across Tehran in the dark, people are still chanting. That tells you something about the depth of their anger. The people chanting from the windows deserve to be heard. Share this video because this story is not getting enough honest coverage. See you next time.